Greetings. I am Dorothy Dowling, and welcome to It's Personal Stories, a hospitality podcast that highlights the inspiring journeys of leaders in the hospitality industry. We are a non-profit organization dedicated to personal empowerment. I am delighted to welcome Mike Gamble, Chairman and CEO of SearchWide Global. Mike, it is such an honor to have you with us today.
Dorothy, great to be with you. Really looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Well, let's get to it, Mike. I think the first question I would like to hear from you is that you've been in executive search for quite a while now, but you started your career in the hotel industry as a sales and marketing leader, and you spent time in the CVP space. I'm wondering if you can share a bit about your journey and some of those career inflection points with our audience.
Yeah, I would love to. Dorothy, I'm going to tell you a quick story. Back to college days. I promise it won't be too long, but it's kind of interesting and a little funny. I was at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, studying business. And my dentist said, well, what do you want to study? And I said, well, business. And he said, well, but what do you like in business? And I said, I love hotels and resorts because I've worked at one in the summers for the last 4 or 5 years. He said, well, you should go to the University of Wisconsin Stout. They have a hotel restaurant degree and program there. This, by the way, Dorothy, this is in the early to mid 80s. I got out of the dentist chair, called my father, and said, I'm going to transfer to University of Wisconsin Stout. They have a degree in hotel restaurant. My father said, are you sure it's a 4-year degree? And those words are ring so true today that he was skeptical that I could really earn a degree. And I did. I went to Stout, and those were in the days when University of Wisconsin Stout was graduating about 1,000 students in hotel restaurant. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky, Dorothy, to go there, to earn my degree and then to be hired by Marriott. Right out of Stout, and even luckier to get put into the sales training program with Marriott. So 9 wonderful years, moved all over the country, loved every single minute of it. When the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau opportunity came up, I think some were surprised and some thought maybe I was a little crazy to leave the company. And I was running global sales for Chicago West at that time for Marriott. But I saw this opportunity in Philadelphia as one that it's not that I really had a desire to work in a CVB. It just looked like a job that seemed interesting to me. So I embarked on that as Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing for the Philly CVB. And I'll tell you, Dorothy, that for me was a very pivotal moment in my career. It broadened my perspective of the industry, that what I learned about the depth and dearth of our industry was just fascinating in the world of course, convention, trade show, working with the convention center in Philly, but more importantly, politics and just all those aspects. So I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world. Loved that job. And those were in the days where Philly was really embarking on a rebirth of the community. So it was fun to be a part of that. And then loved the job, wasn't looking for my next gig, but here came an opportunity to start SearchWide Global. And that was 25 years ago now that we really started this company in September of 1999. So we're 25 and a half years of executive search and travel, tourism, hospitality events. And it's been a good run. So that's my story.
Well, I think you shared some very interesting pieces. Mike, part of it was just the formal education and then how you really embrace the opportunity at Marriott, because they are definitely one of the leaders in the business that provide amazing professional development for their teammates. So I do think the discipline that you approached your career, and then I also share, just that courage to make the leap into maybe a non-traditional career choice that broadened your understanding of the industry and just the complexity of our industry. And as you said, working in a CVB or an association, there's just so many different voices that one has to learn to navigate, support, and consider as you're making your decisions. So those are all really good things for people to think about in terms of really having an intentional career map. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, you bet.
I'm wondering if we can move a little bit into, just a lot of the expertise that you bring from the executive search space. And, part of it is really just the trends that are really shaping our industry in terms of talent today, Mike. And I'm just wondering if there's anything that you can share that you see as being very notable in terms of recruiting and talent sourcing.
Yeah, boy, Dorothy, there are quite a few things. I mean, of course, I'd be remiss not to start with technology and AI. And when I started the business 25 years ago, gosh, we didn't have LinkedIn. And so when you thought about how to find talent, where to find talent, it was very different than it is today. And when you think now of the digital platforms that are available, it's really almost overwhelming. But I think that, again, we're at an inflection point as it relates to sourcing talent. And I think AI is going to really change the game there, and already has. But the other thing I'd say, though, is maybe a simpler thing is that, the good and I think the smart companies that have effective recruiting and retention have really realized that they've got to have an amazing culture and a place where employees feel that they're contributing to something bigger than the job that they're in. And when we see clients of ours who can really connect those dots for the team members, all the way from the C-suite, all the way to the front line, Dorothy, it just seems that they not only can recruit the best talent, but they can retain the best talent because they've really figured out that kind of that magic connection, if you will, between what makes the culture go, but more importantly, what really gets the associate motivated. The other thing, though, I do hope is that we'll be able to continue to evolve in more skills-based hiring. Because as you know, Dorothy, in our industry, it's pretty traditional. We love to hire people who've been in the chair before, and I get that. But I think, again, with AI, what AI will allow us to do is to really look at people from other industries and analyze the transferable skills. Where might they have experience that's very transferable to our industry? And then help us analyze where are the downfalls and where might they need more training to skill up to a role with us. So that's what I'm hoping continues to evolve as it relates to technology and AI.
Well, I do think that whole element of purpose, and I know all talent today, they want to be connected to organizations where they think they can make a difference. So I think that's a really important message to our audience. And I also really love your message, Mike, in terms of us being more open to think outside the box in terms of how we fill roles and then how we really build out those development plans. And I do think AI is going to empower us to be far more efficient in terms of identifying the opportunities for development, as well as actually providing a lot of that coaching through some of the tools that are being developed by some of the big providers in the space. I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about return to office or RTO, because that certainly is a hot button in the industry. Maybe more broadly, it's not just our industry, but it seems that it's continuing to evolve. A lot of businesses over the last several months have taken a much more, I don't know, stricter approach, I guess would be the words I'd use. And they're using, they're shifting from 3 to 4, some are back to 5 days a week. I'm just wondering what your point of view is on return to office trends and how you see it evolving in the next few years.
Yeah, great question. Big question. Dorothy, that's you're right. It's in all industries, but specifically ours now as well. I don't know if you saw the McKinsey study this week. I'll have to be sure to send it to you. In fact, I think it just came out yesterday with the headlines that RTO will not make employees more productive. And that's a big statement, and it's a good read. And I think that my sense on this, and I know where I stand here. I think if you have an opportunity to have a hybrid workforce, and again, in our industry, that's different. We have a lot of people that have to work in the store, if you will, in the hotel, in the convention center, whatever the case might be. And so you have to balance that. You certainly have those who can work remotely and do not need to be in an office. So that's an important balance. But I think that I feel like if you can be hybrid, I think hybrid will be a part of our workforce for a very, very long time. But I also think it'll swing back and forth with the unemployment rate and it'll just be a pendulum. And it's really supply and demand, right? It's when the reality is, as the unemployment rate goes up, companies will realize that they need to be more flexible, just as we were, Dorothy, during coming out of COVID. I mean, that is really, we were all remote, of course, but you can see how slow that was to come back to RTO. I mean, it's essentially taken about 4 or 5 years now. And I just continue to caution people to say that, to recruit the best talent, retain the best talent, boy, it's more about the productivity than it is where they're doing the work. And that's why I think this new McKinsey study is interesting. And I look at amazing leaders in other industries like Jamie Dimon. He's a brilliant man. I do not agree with anything that he says about this topic. And when he talks about that people aren't productive, those who don't work in an office aren't productive and they don't hustle, well, that's just not true. And so, yeah, I think that Dorothy, to me, speaks a little bit to the gap between the leaders that are typically boomers, or in some cases even above, and the next future generations and how they want to work. So I feel pretty passionately, as you know, about this topic. And I just think it's one that we have to be cautious and not make things mandatory and really focus on productivity more than where they're doing the work is really where I fall on that.
I think having that metric focused approach that you're identifying, Mike, is really something that leaders have to embrace, because I do think there's certain roles, as you've identified, that where there are no options that people have to be on property or in office for, but roles that afford people some of that flexibility, I do think, as long as they're driving home the business outcomes, then that should be the metrics that people drive some of that decisioning around.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if we could explore a little bit more on sort of culture, benefits, compensation, and really get your point of view in terms of how expectations may be shifting or have shifted from both a candidate and an employer perspective.
Yeah, Dorothy, boy, the one thing, and Gallup really emphasizes this, there's been much more of a focus on culture, but the well-being of the employees, the associates, and the meaningful work are two things that I think are pretty new for all of us in the last few years. The next generation is currently and will continue to work differently than you and I did. We both came up, we went where the company told us to go, and we worked 70 hours a week, and I wore that as a badge of honor. That amount of time was just what I did. We moved, and I had my life fit in with that. And I think today the younger generations want to live their best life and have a job that fits in with that. And that's a different mindset and mentality. And some good companies are really understanding that. And that does not mean that you give up productivity in order to have that. It's just a different way to work than what we're all perhaps used to. And yeah, I think that the other piece that we hear a lot, Dorothy, from candidates is that culture and a great boss and well-being are more important than money. From many, especially in the Gen Z and some of the younger generations, not all. I mean, I'm not trying to stereotype generations, but again, that's different than I think my generation, the baby boomer generation. I was very driven by what's my next job, what kind of a position will that be, and how much will I make? Well, that's terrific. I'm ready to go up the corporate ladder and show me the way. That's not going to be the case. So I think that those are the things that we see are most competitive today, Dorothy, and that it's less about people. They want good benefits, they want good pay, they want all those things, of course. But honestly, they're not ranking them as high as some of the other things that I mentioned. And that is, again, culture, but also the person you're going to work for, right?
And I think that's really important, again, messages, Mike, for our audience, because I know for me, I was really disturbed when I saw the Gallup engagement scores, particularly for the US, and seeing that we're at our lowest engagement scores with our teammates than we have ever been in our history. So I think that mindset of culture, being a good leader to your teammates, and then also really recognizing that this work-life harmony for a lot of these individuals is really important, and they will hold their leaders accountable to that. So great messaging. So I'd like to move on, because I know our audience is always interested about their career and how to manage, their career. I'm wondering if you could offer any thoughts in terms of what makes a candidate stand out in today's competitive marketplace.
I've noticed in the last 10 years, I guess I'd say, Dorothy, the emphasis on soft skills, on human skills, on EQ, of course, all of that coupled with authenticity. I think that, it's easier to find those who have the technical ability, understand the role, and can do the job. But what differentiates people oftentimes are their soft skills, their human skills, again, that EQ, and the way in which they are able to collaborate, deliver messages, things like that. I think the other piece that I would say is it's amazing, Dorothy, how many don't think to do homework about the employer that they're going to potentially interview with. And so we spend a lot of time helping our candidates to understand how important that is, because you have to do your research and be well researched before you go into any interview. And we see the candidates that do that stand out. Those who do not are eliminated immediately. And it's not even close, because there's nothing more flattering than, and this, Dorothy, you've hired hundreds, maybe thousands in your career, nothing more flattering than those candidates who've really done their homework and you feel, wow, you've really researched the company, me, our team, like that feels good. And there's nothing more insulting than the opposite. When all of a sudden you're sitting there in 20 minutes, realize, did you even look at our website? Have you even seen our digital platform? And so those pieces, as simple as that is, that differentiates the candidates today. And then lastly, Dorothy, it's the follow-up. There just isn't any follow-up after the interviews. And I mean at the C level, okay, all the way through. But I mean at the most senior of execs will often say, don't forget to send a note, and a handwritten one is really special, but at least an email. And so again, I have 4 kids, Dorothy. They're 25 to 32. And I would tell them when they were out, looking for their first jobs, I said, you can differentiate yourself in your competitive set by doing a couple of these things, because I think that you'll immediately separate yourself, with just these human skills.
Well, I think that's really great advice. And I think, salespeople often are very good at doing all of that kind of research, because that's how they build a piece of business. And
Right.
so I think if people take that mindset and get out there and do a lot of the digital research, but quite frankly, Mike, I think often they have to get out and do some of the physical research. And if there's sites involved and other kinds of things, to get out there and try and experience whatever the product or service is, so that they can have a point of view from a customer point of view and hopefully add some value as they interview through that process.
Yeah.
So I'd like to turn the table now and also ask about hiring leaders, because as we talked about employees wanting to hire their boss, what can a hiring leader learn from you in terms of how they can position themselves to the best candidates so that they choose the job and decide to come on board?
Yeah, boy, again, a great question. There's a real message that is sent based on your interview process, Dorothy, and how either efficient or clunky that is. And so we often talk a lot about that. If when you're interviewing and even onboarding, even after you hire someone, that first few interviews and then those first couple of months in the job, it really should be the best of each other. And if it's not, then that's not going to be a good long-term relationship, right? And so I think again, it's helping our clients to understand that, hey, authenticity rules. Let's show the real culture. It's easy for candidates to really identify if the culture is real or not. I'll tell you the companies that concentrate on their brand promise for their current and future employees are the ones that are really winning. And who I think is doing that well, Dorothy, is Hilton. I think they've been doing that well for quite a few years for such a large hotel company. But the way in which they talk to their current employees and their future employees, and that brand promise about being a part of the Hilton family, and Marriott does a good job too, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say others don't, but they really stand out because I think it's very intentional. And so I think it gives them an advantage. I mean, when they're recruiting and hopefully even retaining, because again, it's too easy to, though you can't fake it during the interview. The employers just can't, because it's too easy with Glassdoor, too many ways to find out if it's real or not. So you better have an authentic and real culture to start with, or you're gonna lose the talent war for the most part. And we really do believe that. Our clients who've got that buttoned up and figured out, they are able to recruit and retain the best talent. There's really no debate there. So those are a couple of things that I would highlight.
Okay, that's great advice. I'd like to expand on that a little bit because you referenced retention, which, for me is critically important because as we think about sales and marketing roles, holding on to the customers you have is always job one. And I would say the same applies to talent. So are there other ideas that you could expand upon that great companies are really deploying to hold on to their employees and keep them engaged?
Yeah. Yeah. This one's not very creative and probably doesn't seem that out of the box, but it's this mutual trust and respect, Dorothy, and that gets back a little bit to the return to office and
Yeah.
remote work versus not. And are we really trust that they're working? And are we measuring them properly so that we can trust them? And I think that let's not micromanage, let's not watch the clock and see when they're working. Let's measure the right things. I think it's really important. One thing that jumps out that I would not have said 10 years ago is sabbaticals, Dorothy. It's amazing. We see that in the destination sector, in the hotel sector, venues with more and more sabbaticals being offered. And I'll tell you, I'm at the C-suite, and all honestly all the way through the organization, but starting in the C-suite. And I think that is really refreshing because that's hard to do when you think about it for a small company or a large one. When I think about it, I've got a little over 20 employees. I think, gosh, how would I let someone do a 3-month or a 6-month sabbatical? But the companies who have figured it out, I think that's a big, big differentiator. And lastly, it's what, again, you and I have talked about a lot, this investing in the skill development of your people and in their mental health and in their well-being. And when they really feel like you care about them and improving their skills and improving their mental health, wow, I think that is a recipe to keep someone long-term within your organization. Because again, it creates an authentic and meaningful relationship, between the employee and the employer. So those are a couple of things that, Dorothy, that stick out to me.
Well, I think the big message that I really like that you offered, Mike, is this element of trust because relationships are based on trust. And I do think if I think about some of the engagement scores that Gallup released this year, I think that is one of the underlying problems is that employees don't feel valued, respected, and trusted. And that's an area that I think we all have to do some thoughtful, unpacking to figure out how do we do that better.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So I'd like to move on to some of the big roles because there's so many people that, have big aspirations that they'd like to land in the C-suite someday. So I'd like to give you this sentence and say, if you had to fill in the blank, the strongest C-suite candidates possess these attributes, what would you say?
Boy, this list can get long pretty quickly, Dorothy, but I have a few that I keep at the top of my list. And I don't mean to be redundant, but I am. This high EQ is a big one, and this authenticity is another. But then I think right after that about humility, and I see some, and I see. I'm sorry, Dorothy. I thought we lost each other.
Yeah.
I see that sometimes people just lose that and lose the fact that we're all humans and we can. I think we can lead with humility, and I think that's important. And listen, of course, integrity and ethics. I mean, those are high on the list. But this collaborative piece, Dorothy, at all levels, we have found that in the C-suite that even CEOs and C-level executives have really learned over the years to be a great leader. You've got to be a collaborative team leader and team builder. And so that's high on my list. Empathy. I mean, again, I could give you a list of 20, but those are the ones that for me that are right off the a good strategic vision. I mean, passion, but again, I lead with the EQ, the authenticity, and the humility are the ones that we hear the most and we see the most, and that our clients seem to really connect to.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great advice. That's all those human skills that you referenced earlier, Mike, and truly, I do think that element of humility and people not thinking they're the smartest person in the room and they have all the answers is a very important skill set for people to recognize, because there's so many great thoughts that come from teammates if we give them the space and the comfort to offer their ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm also wondering if you could share some of your favorite interview questions when you're assessing those leadership capabilities in C-suite executives.
Well, I think if anyone's watching that's worked with us, especially for C-level interviews, there, when you kind of get to that final one or two, and they're either presenting or you're on that second or third interview, a favorite of ours, and which turns out to be a favorite of our clients, is to really understand the vision of a leader, is to say, hey, let's think 5 years from now, and what does the organization and your team look like under your leadership, and how did you get there? And I think that the way in which leaders can work through a question like that, I think, is interesting, and it allows our clients to really unpack the way that they think about a big question like that. Another one is about status quo. Give us an example of when you've had to challenge the status quo. And how did you approach the situation? What was the outcome? That's another one, Dorothy. And a third one, because we know this happens in all industries and all businesses, but we all have dilemmas. But when there's an ethical dilemma, give us an example of when you've had a situation that was an ethical dilemma, and in your role and as a leader and for your team and for your company, how'd you resolve it? And what'd you learn from it? And so those are three favorites but I honestly think they become our candidates' favorites too, because they've likely have multiple examples of all those. And so, yeah, those are a couple that I'd like to share.
Well, I think those are great questions they're very thought-provoking, and hopefully the audience that's listening and watching can sort of think through some of those things, because I do think you have to really spend some time investing in how you would articulate those perspectives on those questions.
Yeah.
I know you referenced some of the mistakes in terms of follow-up after interviews, et cetera, but I'm wondering if there's anything else you might offer to the audience in terms of common mistakes that you see executives make in interviews, and what advice you would give them to stand out.
Yeah, it's first we always have to remember there's a lot of adrenaline. It's an intense interview. If it's with a committee or if it's whatever it might be, you're usually pretty charged up and ready to go. One thing that we say right away is just always remember that you're not running the meeting. And what that means is it's just a simple thing that we say, and that is to say, they're running the meeting, and so you're listening to the questions and answering the questions. And so that's a big one for us. The other one is, again, back to my do your homework, because I think that all through an interview, if you've done your homework, you then have to be really specific about how you sprinkle that knowledge in throughout the interview, right? And I think that it doesn't have to be obvious, and it's not all at once, and it's just you kind of sprinkle it in an hour and a half or 2 hours, and boy, that will leave the interviewer or the committee with a very good taste in their mouth. The big one, Dorothy, I have to say though, is try to answer the question that was asked, not 2 or 3 additional questions you think you should answer with the original question that was asked. And that's hard. That again is hard when there's a lot of adrenaline. And you know what I mean? It's that one question, and then all of a sudden 5 minutes later, we're suddenly we're answering the same thing, but we're talking about something completely different. It's that ability to say, gosh, they'll get there. The interviewer will get there. Just remember, they're running the meeting. And so just try to follow their cadence. I think that's a big piece for us. And then lastly, and this is a big one too, is you've got to have some questions ready. Again, nothing worse. And Dorothy, you and I have both been there. I was just there recently with my own company, and I said, "What questions do you have for me?" And well, really none. Well, gosh, don't tell me you don't have any questions. I mean, there have to be some questions, right? And so that's important. And I think the type of questions at the C level, I think the type of questions you ask is equally as important. And so I think you have to have a couple of very tactical questions. And I think you have to have a couple of very big 30,000 foot visionary questions so that you don't run the risk of leaving the room and then saying, oh gosh, they're only tactical, or gosh, they're too big of a thinker. I think mixing both together are super important. So those are a few things. I know that probably sounded like a really long list, Dorothy, but those are a couple of things that come to mind for C-suite interviews.
Well, I think those are really impactful pieces of wisdom that you've shared, Mike. And to me, it really just speaks to the nature of being prepared and being very thoughtful. But I think that advice of understanding who's running the meeting is really important, especially for senior leaders, because they're used to being in that other chair. So thank you for sharing that. That's a great piece of advice. Yeah. I'm wondering if we can move on in terms of thinking about career growth for a lot of the listeners that are partaking in this interview. And one of the questions that we often ask our advisors that join this podcast is about professional networking and how important it is in career advancement, and what advice you would give to individuals as they start out their careers in terms of that. Is it important, and how do they go about building it?
Yeah, it's an important question. Even in our small little company, Dorothy, and we're involved in a lot of industry associations, greater industry associations. And one of my rules is that's fine. I think we're a part of probably 35 plus organizations. And the rule is simple. You're not just going to be a member. We're going to get involved, and we're going to get involved at the committee level, eventually perhaps at the board level. That's really important. It's important for your personal growth. It's important for our company and our brand. And I think all those things are true. Dorothy, I've worked for 3 companies in my career, and one, of course, is my own. But 2 of those opportunities came to me through my involvement and engagement in industry associations and networking and learning and growing. But then people getting to know me and who I am as a person and how I work in a volunteer capacity. And I think that I'll never forget that. And I look at our younger groups now, and I think they want that. And I think many say, oh, they don't want to do it. That's not true. I think they'd love to do it, and they want to be a part of an HSMAI or an MPI. And boy, we encourage everyone to do that. I think it's an important part of your career growth. And I think it's a very important part for your company engagement as well. I mean, you're there representing your company, but you're also representing yourself, and you're upskilling and learning a lot of new things from a personal perspective as much as professional. So that's a big one for me is get involved and really do it in a meaningful way. And I think that makes a big difference in the career journey. I mean, look, you and I really got to know each other. We've known of each other, really got to know each other through HSMAI. And it's the natural way, isn't it? And I don't want anyone to ever forget that, what an important part that is in your career journey too.
Yeah, no, I totally concur with everything you said, Mike. And I do think for people that are earlier in their career getting involved, it just affords them not only a front row seat from an observational learning opportunity, but just building some of that peer mentorship and growth. It really is substantive. I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about an ideal relationship between a candidate and an executive recruiter, because I'm not sure everyone really understands that. Yeah,
no, that's fair. That's Dorothy. That was the biggest eye opener for me 25 years ago when I started. Is I suddenly realized people thought I was Jerry Maguire and that I was going to represent them as a person, right? And I said, no, I'm not Jerry Maguire. I work for our clients. And so, I think we have nearly 50 opportunities we're working on today with 50 great clients. And I often say we're like a realtor, we're working for the seller. And in this case, it's for our clients. But the reality is we care deeply about the candidates, and we want to nurture their journey as well. And help them to show up the best that they can if we're fortunate enough to put them in front of one of our clients. And so that's a delicate balance, but the reality is we're paid by our clients and we work on their behalf, but we're there to help make a deal. We want to find the best talent we can for them. And what I would say is it's the ideal relationship is all about trust and honesty. And when we work hard to help them to understand, so that the candidates understand what our role is, but that we're in the long-term relationship business with them. This isn't a transaction business. And so sometimes you may not get that job, or this might not be the one for you. We're going to maintain that relationship and find the right fit. And I think that piece of trust and honesty is critically important. Honesty is critically important because, boy, neither one of us want to be surprised during that journey. And we certainly don't, for something you maybe didn't share with us that you should have, that'll come up during an interview. And so those are the things that we really focus on the most to have good relationship, and it's worked in our behalf. But I'll tell you, the opposite of it is, Dorothy. We just the honesty piece is a big one. And when you've been in business now 25 years, imagine the history of resumes that we have. So there are times where I'll say, gosh, you sent us this resume 18 years ago. Where is that job and that job? Let's just have an honest conversation about that. Because, this is the story of your professional life. Let's not take things off because it's convenient or it was a short stint at that hotel or whatever the case might be. Let's include it and just tell the story. It's a part of your story. It's okay. So that's the way we approach it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do appreciate you being so honest, Mike, in terms of really clearly establishing that you're there to support the client. And obviously the candidate is part of that process, and you do have long-term investments in those relationships, but it is understanding that that is the relationship that candidates should expect when they're dealing with a recruiter. Mm-hmm. We're coming up near the end of our interview here, Mike, and I just wondering if you could offer your best piece of advice for individuals in the hospitality industry who want to build a career map and plan their career journey with intention.
Yeah, I think the big one, Dorothy, is to find a good mentor or two. And I think that I don't want to say that we have not done that as well in the last 5 or 10 years, but I don't feel like we have. I just seemed easier to me maybe 15 years ago. I don't know, but it starts there with me. And I think being then really intentional with your career dreams and aspirations. And I think a mentor can help you with that. And that can come in many forms. It can be a previous boss, coworker, whatever the case might be. So I think that's a big piece of it. And we talked about it, getting involved. Getting involved in industry organizations is a big one. But then lastly, and this one sounds so simple, Dorothy, but we have to remember this simple adage that, don't ever burn a bridge. And what's happened in the last few years with this ghosting, by the way, we see it on the client side and the candidate side. And honestly, it's appalling to me. I'm thinking, what are we thinking here? And for an executive search firm, we have a long memory and a great database that's not the way we treat one another. We just don't do that. We don't not show up for interviews or not show up for a job and just think that that's going to drift away. That's just not the way that we want to act or treat one another. And that's a piece that we take the time to talk to people about that. If that happens to happen to us, we help them to understand how that can impact your career long term. That's the same as burning a bridge, is what we now today call ghosting, right? Yeah. It's something that people just won't forget. But again, I would say that that goes for clients as well. I think we have to be a lot better about the way in which we communicate with one another about important things like this, potential jobs. So those are a few takeaways, Dorothy, that I'd have today. And yeah, I'd be interested to hear if you've got any to add to that.
No, I think you've just offered so many brilliant ideas for both candidates and employers, Mike. But I've always been of that same mindset about never burning a bridge, because the world is small, our industry is small. And I've always said to people, be careful of that informal reference check, because when you do burn a bridge, you never, ever know who knows some of the individuals that you might be trying to get a role with. And them just being silent or sometimes not being positive about your candidacy may be the end of that opportunity for you. So I agree with everything that you presented, Mike, and I'm just so grateful for your honesty and candor. I do think there's so many individuals that are working on their career journeys and definitely want an intentional career map to attain the kind of dreams that they have. So I'm grateful that you took the time with us today. I'm thankful of all of the great wisdom that you've shared with our audience, and it really has been a privilege to speak with you. So thank you.
Well, I feel the same way, and thanks for inviting me. And it's always great talking to you, Dorothy. I enjoyed it very much.
Likewise. So if I may, I'd also like to thank our audience and just offer, if you've enjoyed this interview today, I hope you'll visit us on our website. It's personalstories.com, where you'll see webcasts and podcasts from other industry leaders that I know will empower your knowledge and fuel your spirit. So we hope to see you there.